From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, all right. I am glad you're here with me today. If you were listening last week, you know we were talking to film director, writer, producer, editor John Grooters. I call him the Francis Ford Coppola of Christian filmmakers. John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, man. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Man, it just seemed like a few minutes ago. It's a whole week ago.
Whole week ago. It's getting cold.
We pre-recorded this, so we actually did finish our last interview just a few minutes ago. But I'm so thankful to have you back. John is the writer-director of Sabina, which just came out last year, as well as Tortured for Christ, and other films and other shorts. And he's done so much stuff. But today I want to talk about those two movies. And you can get more information on John by going to johngrooters.com, GROOTERS.com, and John is JOHN. And you can find out more about his films and where you can see them and learn more about him. And last week was great. If you missed it, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, or you can go to any place where podcasts are played, and you can listen to it, catch up on what we talked about. But, John, I would love to talk about Tortured for Christ and Sabina. What amazing stories. Filmed in Romania. They looked like $30, $40 million movies. I mean, they just looked amazing. And I know, I'm not quite sure what your budgets were, but I know they weren't $40 million.
No.
You're doing it for Voice of the Martyrs, right? You did that
Correct.
for them?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about how this came about. Let's start out with how Tortured for Christ came about, how you got into the picture, and just kind of like walk us through how this happened. Because I'm telling you, if you haven't seen, I'm just going to jump in here. If you haven't seen Tortured for Christ and Sabina, tonight, you need to go watch both of these films. They are some of the best Christian films made. They're so good, so well done. And I know PureFlix is carrying them. Where else can they see them? Do you know where they can find them?
SabinaMovie.com. Voice of the Martyrs will still let you stream for free if you register with them. So you can watch it at Sabina on SabinaMovie.com. And, like PureFlix, as you said. I believe Tortured is on Amazon Prime still. So I know those are some of the opportunities.
Fantastic. And, some people are going, well, gee, Tortured for Christ, I don't want to see that. That just sounds too hard and too harsh. But I really do recommend it. It's done tastefully. It's not gross. It's not something that, if you're squeamish, would you agree with that, John?
It was a real question right from the start. The reason it's a powerful movie isn't because of the torture. It's because Richard and Sabina Wurmbrand are such exemplary Christians. And it's just sort of inspiring to sort of be in their presence. Obviously, in a movie, that's not really their presence, but since they both have gone home in 2000 and 2001 to the Lord, this is one way to do it. I mean, reading their books or anything else. But, I never met Richard Wurmbrand in this life or Sabina in this life. But I feel like I've spent the last 5 years with them, and I feel like I am a better Christian for that experience. And I'm hopeful that anyone who sees these films takes a step in that same direction. It's truly inspiring to see what the Lord can do in an individual life, or in this case, in a couple's life. And the movie was envisioned by the Voice of the Martyrs as a way to commemorate the 50-year anniversary of Richard's book by the same title, Tortured for Christ. He spent 14 and a half years in communist prisons in his home country of Romania for preaching the gospel, which continues to be in opposition to communist ideology, of course. And communist prisons were not just sort of places where you're taken off the street to protect the civilians. Communist prisons are places where you're subjected to the worst mental, physical, abusive tortures as you can imagine in your brain, all in order to persuade you to come along with the party line. And having any faith in God is not the party line. And so the easy thing for a human being to do is to capitulate and to deny the Lord. And there's, in the Bible, we read a lot of examples of where someone's asked to bow down before Nebuchadnezzar or bow down before Caesar. The resistance to do that as a human being has to come from a very deep place. And it's the place from which the martyrs come. It's the place where Jesus says, you must carry your cross and follow me. There's a suffering component to the Christian life that, of course, as human beings, we don't even want to consider. None of us, no matter how great, wants to suffer. So when we read about the disciples or the early followers of Jesus or modern-day followers of Jesus who embrace suffering for the sake of the name, we ask ourselves, how could they do that? And could I ever do that? Would I be the first one on my knees before Nebuchadnezzar, before Caesar? Well, Richard didn't look for that fight, but he found it. It came to him. It came into his country twice, and it came in the form of the Nazis when the World War II started, and then the country of Romania switched sides halfway through, and they joined the Allies, which you might think would be the Americans, but the part of the Allies they got were the Stalinist communists, and 1 million communists flooded the borders, took over all of their institutions, and ran their country for 50 years. Richard miraculously, and that's what the movie Tortured for Christ is about, is that period of time. But by God's hand, he survives it, and he was ransomed out of his country, and he came to America, and he, with a piece of paper and a pencil, scratches out this book, Tortured for Christ. He took 3 days to write it, and it was published. And nobody had written before that a first-hand account of life in an Iron Curtain prison. Nobody that I'm aware of. Maybe somebody had, but as far as I know, nobody had. And Tortured for Christ, it's very raw, it's very just first person, and you see the hand of God in these incredible ways that Richard describes. And it was a bestseller in the 60s. And so in 2017, 20-year anniversary of that book, Voice of the Martyrs thought we could make a documentary or a docudrama about the book. And they had put up kind of this to see who might be the people to do that. And we were one of at least 3 of the finalists, and really a super blessing, something I'll never, ever forget and appreciate when we got the chance to take that story. The only problem was I didn't then and I don't today really know what a docudrama is. Maybe, Rick, you can inform me. How much of it is docu and how much of it is drama? And is it like interviews with recreations? Anyway, I just kind of went above and beyond the docu part and just told the story cinematically.
Yeah, you made a movie.
You made it into a movie. Yeah, and
you made a movie.
I couldn't help myself because the opportunity was there. So that's how it came about, and we ended up not knowing where we were going to film it or who we were going to cast or anything, but I did work on a screenplay and decided to take a scout trip to Romania to sort of see where Richard lived and where these things were. And we were met at the airport by a wonderful group of producers, and within a half an hour we were tromping through waist-deep snow to get to this long-forsaken prison. And they had a soldier there that unlocked the door. And Rick, I walked in there, and within 30 seconds it just hit me what this movie could be. We could go to the very prisons where they were held. We could recreate this story because they haven't torn much of that down. I found out in some of the local theaters and backlots that many of the wardrobe of those prisoners and of those soldiers were still on shelves. So we could pull down the wardrobes. We could go to the locations. And then to add to all that, it turns out that Bucharest is a very active theater community. People can make a living, a lot of people make a living working in theater in Bucharest. It's a city of 3 million, and there are big theaters, national theaters, small little one-man theaters, which means there's a lot of talent. And most of them speak English. So it just kind of came together that we would shoot and cast the film in Richard's backyard. And that gave it authenticity.
Yeah, it looked amazing, and the actors were so good. So authentic. So many times, I'm not trying to slam, but you have low budgets, and so you have to work with what you got. And so many times it doesn't feel authentic because to get the authentic actors, they're just expensive, Yeah. But to go to Romania and to get them, to do that story, that particular story, wow. It's just
Yeah.
everything was just so well done. Looked good, sounded great. Just the wardrobe. I mean, there's so much to do in your world. I mean, in my world, I show up with 2 guys, a light, a microphone, and 2 cameras, right? That's what I show up with.
Yeah.
I show up with me and 2 guys.
Yeah.
And you've got, because I do documentaries.
Yeah.
You've got wardrobe. You've got makeup. You've got actors. Plus you got sound. Plus you got lighting. Plus you got cameras. I mean, you got so much stuff you're having to take care of.
And our audience is so sophisticated. And by the way, Show Me the Father was an amazing documentary, and it was a lot more than you showing up with a light and a camera. The recreations and the storyline. So I want to shout out to Rick and the work he does, because that is a moving and powerful. If you haven't seen Show Me the Father, my goodness, it's wonderful. But there's a thing that we do deal with, and you are right, and I do fret about this in a good way, not in a stressful way, but that we can't have a weak link. It's not like you can have a weak link and just run the ball the other direction because your left tackle is weak. If your art department doesn't cut it and you suddenly give away that you're not in the 1940s and someone sees it, the scene is now broken. You mentioned audio. If you don't have top quality dialogue and environmental sounds and sound effects and music in every minute of your show, people won't even know why, but all of a sudden they disengage with the quality of it. Of course, the level of acting, and we need to help our actors out by good writing. I don't care if you're the best actor in the world. Daniel Day-Lewis can't turn a bad script into a good one. And so write to the level of your actors. Don't put too many words in their mouth. Let them communicate a lot of what they're doing without words by their movements and by their head to toe. If you're going to be writing a scene where it's going to be in subtitles, that really, it's a wonderful discipline, Rick, because it forces you to be concise. And first drafts of scripts tend to be so wordy. Why? Because we're writing words. And it's harder to write actions and moments when you're not there. But by knowing that, this guy's going to be speaking Russian, I've got to put a subtitle on the screen. I got to keep that subtitle to 4 or 5 words. I can't have a paragraph of subtitles. It forces me to consolidate those words. And I think I should probably pretend even all the English is going to be in subtitles, because that's a good discipline. But then the actors have to bring a real sense of the craft and a devotion to the character. And so I got the privilege of doing Tortured for Christ. It was released in 2017. And I hope you all get to see it, because I love the film. And like you said about the sense of torture, what would you do if you were the director? Because if you kind of candy coat the level of inhumane, I would call it satanic abuse, you've now not really covered the story authentically. On the other hand, if you did show in detail everything they did, you'd have an R or worse rating, and you would
Passion for the Christ. That's how Mel Gibson did that, right?
Or even farther. Exactly, because what the Romans did, to political prisoners was as brutal as they could concoct in their brains. Same thing with the communists and the Soviets. So that was a big artistic choice, and we tried to kind of walk to the line but not walk over it, knowing that we wanted this to be accessible in churches. At the same time, we didn't want to be disrespectful for the story. There was one scene in the movie where a friend of Richard's, a pastor, is chained to the wall. And this is the hardest scene in the film by far. They bring in his son, and they execute the son in front of the father. And when we got the rating, I was waiting to get the MPAA rating for the film, and the phone finally rang, and the guy on the phone was really, really cool. And he said, I got to tell you, I've been working this job for 25 years. This is the last film I'm doing. I'm retiring. And he said, I want to thank you, because I've done a lot of films that have added very little to our culture, and to finish with this film has made me feel really good. This is a quality film. And he says, but when the raters first saw the film, they were going to give it an R rating, because they said you showed the execution of a child. But then he said, you guys go back and watch that scene again and slow it down. I don't think they did show that. I think the screen went to black and you imagined it. And that is how we had handled the scene.
Right.
And they all had not even realized that we hadn't shown that particular thing that they thought they saw. And so we got a PG-13, thank the Lord. But how to handle violence in a film like that was an issue. Then we moved on to make Sabina, and we had the same dilemma with how to handle lust. The story of Richard and Sabina's background wasn't one of the Puritans, right? And to not cover the fact that part of the reason they became such amazing forgivers is that they themselves felt forgiven. You know, the Bible says, he who has forgiven much loves much. And he who has been forgiven little loves little. And if we get
he who has been forgiven much loves much.
Yeah, he who has been forgiven much loves much. If as believers we feel like, we've been pretty doggone good. God only had to give us a little bit of grace. We're going to tend to be that way with other people. We're just going to give a little bit of grace here and there and figure that they didn't earn it. Well, Richard and Sabina's lavish ability to love people in the name of Christ came out of a very deep sense that they had experienced his mercy and his grace. So I guess I say all that to say, when you're writing that, from what? So how far do you push visually and on the screen some of the things that they struggled with, wrestled with, sins that they committed?
Just how non-Christian were they before they got saved? And how much do you want to show that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a fine line too, because
right.
On the one hand, Christians don't want to buy a movie ticket and be offended.
Right.
They don't want to do that, and
right.
so that is that. Man, well, you're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bott Radio. My guest today, filmmaker John Grooters. We're talking about his films, Tortured for Christ and Sabina, and you can find those films online. You can watch them by going to sabinamovie.com, or is it just...
Yeah, sabinamovie.com. In fact, Voice of the Martyrs will send you the Blu-ray DVD for a donation of any size. So Voice of the Martyrs is a phenomenal ministry. I'm really blessed and privileged to get to work with them from time to time. And what they want is to get this movie out and to get it seen. And so they will help you see it at your church for a public screening. They'll send you the DVD Blu-ray. They'll let you watch the stream. They're all about the ministry, and this is a good chance for you to see the film.
And boy, I'll tell you, it's timely right now.
Sure.
I'm telling you, as our culture is starting to shift and switching further and further away from a Christian culture to a post-Christian, there's some similar themes. It's not persecution yet, but it wants to get there here in our culture. But this is happening still in China. It's happening all over the world right now in Middle Eastern countries. Our brothers and sisters are being persecuted for their faith. And so I think these are very important movies. I think they're great to bring into your church and your small group, your home group. Sit down and watch these, have some great conversations. And they're accessible. That's the great thing. You can get these movies. You can watch them. So John, thanks for making such powerful filmmaking, which, you don't always put Christian movie and powerful filmmaking in the same sentence. And so it's nice that's happening, and that we're seeing the bar get raised. Can we speaking of that bar being raised, if you don't mind, how did you get it to look? How do you make a movie on a limited budget and make it look like it's a $30 million movie? How is that possible?
Yeah, first of all, I love the question. Thank you so much, because that really is a goal every time we go out. And the short answer is efficiency. You have to put in your time in pre-production to every single detail, because the most expensive thing for us is time. We had a crew of maybe 100 people, big cast, locations that are period. So every day that we have to bring that number of people together and house them and feed them and pay their day rates, you're burning through money. So literally, if you can turn your shoot from a 22-day shoot to a 19-day shoot, you've just saved a lot of money. Judy, my wife, is the producer on these films, and she is incredibly efficient, and she pushes us hard towards efficiencies. And in some ways, the director-producer relationship is sort of inevitably meant to be a little bit like this. The director has these dreams, and they want to have spaceships flying in and, turn day to night and night to day. The producer is looking at the checkbook and going, we got to come in under budget. Well, it's to our advantage to come in on budget and on time, but it requires some real efficiencies in shooting. So my short answer is, man, we pre-pro to the nth degree. So by the time we're on set, man, I'm not making up any new decisions. I know what cameras, what lenses, what positions, exactly where we're going. The crew knows it. The cast knows it. I didn't have to speak. It's like my wife played volleyball in high school, and she was great. She was a state champion, and her school, after she left, won 18 state championships with her coach. And I said, what was it about this guy, Jack Magnuson, that was such an amazing coach? And she says it was all practice. She said when the game started, he didn't say a thing. His team knew how to play. He pushed them hard in practice, and when the game started, they knew what to do. It's sort of like that. If we have communicated and planned efficiently, we will move from setup position to setup position to setup position throughout that day, bang, 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 and the lighting crew knows what's coming and what's going, and the camera teams know what's this and that, and I can run the takes until we're happy, next setup. If we can move with that kind of efficiency, then if we have great talent, which means cinematographers and art department and wardrobe department and acting and special effects, you have to then have all these people who each one of them does their job effectively. Then maybe we can get through a shoot in a few days and hopefully in the end, then the final bit, the editing, the color correction, that adds to it as well. It's working well in those disciplines to create a look. And let's just be honest, we're copycats. I don't pretend to invent anything. I copy everything. So I'll pick a couple of films that I like the look of, and I'll have those films playing constantly on the monitors in my house or my office. I'll have the DP constantly looking at those films, and it looks like they did they added whatever color. So we're trying to use a few models. But then, I guess, gosh, I could talk for hours. The other thing is God. You can't do this work without God. And I'm not trying to be religious here. I laugh because I only have so many days. The weather has to cooperate. I just don't have time for rainstorms and weather outages. And if we had more time, I'd love to just let you draw your own conclusions of when I need it to be cloudy, it's cloudy. And when I need it to rain, it rains. And when I need it to snow, it snows. And when we need the ice to melt, the ice melts. And so we'll just attribute that to the power of prayer and saving our bacon over and over again and making what looked like such a real snowstorm when they kidnapped Richard on the streets. That's because it was a real snowstorm that day, and we had fake snow ready to go, and it was like the blizzard of a decade, and it was beautiful. And then the blizzard finally lifted, then we're breaking snow sticks and doing things to kind of finish the scene. But let's just give credit where credit's due.
Wow. Praise the Lord. Amazing. So for you personally, what was it like working on these films? For you personally?
Fantastic. For one, Judy and I work together. We've been married now and raised the kids, and so taking the time to spend a lot of time on a foreign location working film is not a good choice for families and for dads. It's not the right thing to do, and our kids were in hockey and all these things. Kids have moved out, and we have some time on our hands. So to be able to do it together with my wife is wonderful. Not only has she got all the complimentary gifts that I don't have, we actually are trying to model marriage as we go around the world. Not that we're perfect at it, but we're just trying to show people you can see how John and Judy work together and how they fight when they have to fight and how they forgive when they have to forgive. And that's great. And then, this is the kind of business where you can make some lifelong friends. And we have a church home now in Bucharest. We have friends in Bucharest. They all called. My wife, it was her birthday yesterday, and she started getting calls from Romania, which is a beautiful thing. So personally, it was terrific. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
And spiritually, how did you grow spiritually telling these stories?
Well, Richard and Sabina Wormbrand are showing me a level of obedience to Christ that I had not deeply embraced or chewed on. And I ask the same question everybody who watches the film is, would I have the strength of conviction to stand up when the persecution comes? The Bible says it will come. And the answer is, I don't know, but the Holy Spirit in me can do all things. And Richard and Sabina were self-aware too. They didn't take credit for anything. Sabina says at the end of the movie, I couldn't do these things, but Christ in me can do all things.
Praise the Lord.
That's super confidence building.
Amazing. Well, they're amazing films. I recommend all of my listeners to go and find Tortured for Christ first, and then Sabina, which is the one that came out last year. Is that when it came out?
Yeah, it came out last November. It did about 800 screens. It's done over 5,000 churches. It's now being translated into 50 languages. And if you're going to watch them both, watch Sabina first because it's actually the prequel.
Okay.
So if you watch Sabina first, then you'll get into Tortured, and that's the actual way historically it moves from the Nazis' occupation to the Soviet occupation. But we did film in the other order.
Sabina. And you can get more information on John Grooters, GROOTERS.com. John, thank you so much for being on the show. Wow, we had 2 amazing interviews, and just went by so fast. I just loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. It's always a joy to be with you.
Man, you rock. All right. If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.